The station drifted where gravity gave up trying, a cathedral of alloy and light suspended above a violet star that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. I arrived there with a toolkit that was older than the station's newest wing and a badge that identified me as Auxiliary Human Specialist, which was a polite way of saying I fixed things no one else wanted to admit were broken. I had practiced my neutral face in the mirror of the shuttle, the one that said I belonged here, even though I very clearly did not. The corridors hummed with languages that bent sound into unfamiliar shapes, and the air carried the faint metallic scent of recycled atmospheres stitched together by compromise. Everyone knew the Queen would be present. Everyone except me, apparently. I had been told I would advise engineers, not stand within sight of a sovereign whose decisions rippled across star systems. When I finally saw her, she was seated beneath a floating canopy of light that adjusted itself to her breathing. She looked human enough at first glance, tall and composed, her expression calm to the point of stillness. Then she turned her head slightly, and I saw the long ears, elegant and unmistakable, curving back like living symbols of a history I did not share. It was an odd detail to focus on, I know, but it grounded me. Long ears meant alien, and alien meant I should keep my mouth shut. The crisis announced itself with a shudder that ran through the floor, like the station clearing its throat before delivering bad news. A cascade of alerts bloomed in the air, red symbols layered over polite translations. The energy lattice was slipping out of phase, which sounded poetic until someone explained it meant the station might tear itself apart in 3 hours. Engineers rushed, advisors whispered. I stood there holding my toolkit, wondering if this was a good time to pretend I had left the stove on, back on Earth. I did what I always did when things broke. I offered help, not loudly, not ceremonially. I stepped forward and said, I can take a look. I've worked on older lattices. Sometimes they just need a little encouragement. I even smiled because smiling has solved more problems in my life than any advanced technology. A few aides glanced at me as if I had just proposed we fix the station with tape and optimism. The Queen looked at me directly for the first time. Her gaze was steady, curious, and far too focused for my comfort. The room quieted as if sound itself had decided to listen. I became painfully aware of my posture, my hands, the fact that I was standing in front of a ruler during an interstellar emergency and talking about encouragement. I considered adding a joke, something self-deprecating, but my brain helpfully shut down all humor protocols. She rose. The canopy of light shifted with her, casting patterns across her face. Up close, she looked tired in a way that no amount of authority could hide. She studied me, the long ears catching the glow, and something unreadable passed through her eyes. I waited for dismissal, or arrest, or for someone to gently escort me out before I embarrassed the entire human species. Instead, she inclined her head, a gesture that carried weight I did not understand, and said something in her own language that made several advisors stiffen. The translation lagged, which I would later learn was unfortunate timing. In that pause, she stepped closer. I could hear the distant thrum of the failing lattice, the soft whine of systems arguing with physics. I could also hear my own heart, which had decided to practice percussion. Then she embraced me. It was not a quick, polite touch. It was a full, deliberate embrace, arms firm, forehead briefly resting against my shoulder, as if the universe had just aligned itself correctly. The room collectively forgot how to breathe. I stood there, arms awkwardly hovering, mind racing through possible explanations that did not include, I have accidentally done something historic. I managed to pat her back once, which felt insufficient and possibly illegal. Cameras activated. Data streams flared. Somewhere a commentator probably fainted. I caught snippets of delayed translations spilling into the air, phrases about bonds and vows and standing together in times of collapse. I wondered if this was how legends started, with a misunderstanding and a very public hug. The Queen pulled back, her expression soft, almost relieved. She spoke again, and this time the translation kept up, delivering words about trust, unity, and an acceptance that echoed through the chamber. I opened my mouth to clarify, to explain that on my world this sort of thing usually required at least coffee first. Nothing came out. The lattice groaned again, reminding us all that the station still had opinions about the situation. The Queen turned back to her advisors, already issuing commands with renewed strength. I was gently guided away by a very polite guard, who looked at me with something between awe and pity. As I followed, toolkit clutched like a lifeline. I glanced back once. The Queen met my eyes across the chamber, a faint smile touching her lips. The long ears tilted slightly, a gesture I did not yet understand. I had offered help because things were breaking. Somehow, in the middle of a failing station and a galaxy holding its breath, I had broken something else entirely, and I had the unsettling feeling that it might not be possible or even desirable to fix it. They escorted me to a room that was clearly designed to make important people feel calm. Unfortunately, I was not important people, and Calm had already left the station without filing a flight plan. The walls glowed a polite shade of blue that adjusted to my pulse, which only made me aware that my pulse was doing laps. A small hovering console followed me like a nervous pet, projecting messages I did not ask for and could not fully read. Every few seconds it tried to translate something from the station network, failed, apologized, and tried again. The hug replayed in my mind with cruel clarity. The way the room had frozen, the way the Queen's arms had felt steady, certain, as if she had grabbed onto something solid in a collapsing universe. I had hugged strangers before, humans, usually after shared danger or shared alcohol, but this had not been that. This had been official, ceremonial, possibly legally binding in ways I did not want to imagine. I wondered if my Earth citizenship covered accidental alien marriage. It probably did not. The door chimed softly and 3 beings entered who looked like they had been arguing before deciding to argue in my presence instead. One was tall and translucent, light refracting through layered skin. One was short, armored, and radiating irritation like heat. The third was, to my surprise, human, wearing a uniform that suggested authority and regret in equal measure. "You should not have done that," the armored one said immediately. "I didn't know that," I replied, just as immediately. "If it helps, neither did I." The translucent one tilted their head, which produced a pleasant chime. "Ignorance does not negate resonance," they said, and the translator chose that moment to render it as something about destiny, which did not help. The human cleared his throat. "Do you have any idea what offering personal aid to a reigning sovereign means in her culture?" "I assumed it meant I'd be busy for a few hours," I said. "Maybe miss lunch." All 3 stared at me. The armored one made a noise that might have been a laugh or might have been a system malfunction. "You invoked a vow older than this station," they said, "witnessed by the court, recorded by the lattice itself." I looked at my hands as if the vow might be written there. "I was thinking about energy flow and phase alignment," I said weakly. "I wasn't thinking about vows." The human rubbed his temples. "The broadcasts are already out. Every major network has the footage. Some are calling it a union. Others are calling it a strategic alliance. One particularly dramatic channel is calling it the embrace that changed the stars." "Of course they are," I said. "Why wouldn't they?" Before anyone could explain further, the room vibrated with a low-frequency hum that set my teeth on edge. The failing lattice was reminding us of its continued displeasure. The hovering console brightened, projecting schematics that twisted in on themselves like impossible origami. I leaned forward despite myself, professional instinct kicking in. "That oscillation is wrong," I said. "It's feeding back into the secondary ring." The translucent being regarded me with something like surprise. "You see it?" "It's loud," I said. "Not audibly, just loud. Like when a machine is about to complain." The armored one crossed their arms. "You are here to fix the lattice," they said. "Nothing more." "That was the plan," I said. "Still is, if the station prefers not to become modern art." They exchanged looks, a silent conversation I was not invited to. Finally, the human sighed. "Fine, but you will be accompanied, and you will not speak to the Queen unless spoken to." "That's probably for the best," I said. "I'm running out of neutral phrases." They led me through maintenance corridors that felt older than the polished halls above. Here the station revealed its true nature. Conduits layered over conduits, alien technologies stitched together by necessity rather than design. Gravity fluctuated just enough to keep things interesting. I floated for a moment, then settled back down as the field corrected itself, like the station changing its mind. At the lattice core, light bent in ways my eyes struggled to follow. Energy flowed along crystalline paths, shimmering with unstable harmonics. I approached slowly, tools out, feeling like a mechanic standing before a god with a wrench. As I worked, adjusting frequencies and rerouting flow, my mind kept drifting back to the Queen. The way she had looked relieved, the way her long ears had angled slightly, as if listening for something only she could hear. Why did she do it? I asked, mostly to distract myself. The armored guard hesitated. Our Queen carries the weight of her people alone, they said finally. To receive an offer of personal aid in crisis is rare. To accept it publicly is to declare trust beyond politics. I tightened a coupling and grinned despite myself. On my world, we usually just say thank you. The guard made that half-laugh noise again. Your world is inefficient. The lattice steadied, its hum smoothing into something almost content. Alerts faded from red to cautious amber. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow, and felt a strange mix of pride and dread. I had fixed the immediate problem. I had not fixed the other one. As we left the core, a message pulsed across the corridor walls. The Queen would address the court. My name appeared beside hers in symbols I could not read, but somehow recognized as my own. I swallowed. Well, I said, attempting a smile, at least the station won't explode. The armored guard looked at me solemnly. No, they said, something far more complicated is beginning. I wondered if there was a return shuttle leaving soon, or if the galaxy had already decided that my life had taken a sharp and irreversible turn. The court chamber had been designed to impress species that measured architecture in centuries. Columns of shifting light rose from the floor and dissolved into the ceiling, carrying symbols that rearranged themselves depending on who was looking. Gravity here was carefully balanced, a diplomatic compromise that left everyone slightly uncomfortable, and therefore, according to some long-dead architect, more honest. I was positioned precisely 3 steps behind and to the left of the Queen, which I had been told was a place of acknowledged closeness without presumption. I suspected it was also a place where I could be easily grabbed if I tried to run. The Queen stood composed, her posture effortless, her long ears angled back in a way I was beginning to recognize as focused attention. She looked nothing like someone who had just declared a galaxy-shaking bond by hugging a confused human technician. I, on the other hand, felt like every joint in my body had been replaced with exposed wiring. I tried to keep my face neutral, which unfortunately was my face right before I said something foolish. The chamber filled with representatives, beings of light and stone, scaled diplomats who communicated through color shifts, and humans pretending not to stare. Above us, holographic feeds flickered to life, broadcasting the scene to places I would never visit and cultures I would never fully understand. Somewhere out there, people were forming opinions about me based entirely on my posture and the fact that I was standing near a queen who could probably order a moon relocated. The Queen spoke, her voice calm and resonant, the translators weaving her words into something my brain could follow. She addressed the crisis, the lattice, the resilience of the station. Then she spoke of trust, of the moment when aid was offered without calculation. I felt my ears burn, which was unfair because I did not even have long ones to angle dramatically. When she gestured toward me, a ripple moved through the chamber. I raised a hand in a small, reflexive wave before realizing that waving at an interstellar court was not a known diplomatic gesture. A few beings mimicked it cautiously. One accidentally knocked over a ceremonial staff. I decided that if history remembered me as the man who introduced awkward waving to galactic politics, I could live with that. She has named you, whispered a human aide nearby, eyes wide. I have a name, I whispered back. I've had it for years. The Queen turned slightly, her gaze softening, just enough that I felt it, rather than saw it. She spoke again, and the translators hesitated, as if the concept itself needed a moment to stretch. The words came through as commitment, shared path, standing together when structures fail. I focused on my breathing and reminded myself that panic rarely improved translation accuracy. Then she did it again. She reached for me, not suddenly this time, but with deliberate grace, and drew me into another embrace. This one was different. It was slower, public, unmistakably intentional. A ceremonial gesture I realized dimly, amplified by context and witness. The chamber erupted, not in sound, but in data. Signals spiked, feeds multiplied. Somewhere a historian screamed with joy. I had time in that moment to think several unhelpful thoughts. That I should have worn a better shirt. That my mother would somehow hear about this. That I was fairly certain this counted as a second offense in cultures where one hug was already too many. I settled for gently returning the embrace, which seemed safer than freezing like a malfunctioning service robot. When she stepped back, the Queen's expression held something like quiet certainty. The long ears angled forward now, attentive, open. The court waited. So did the galaxy. I cleared my throat. It echoed far more than it should have. I want to be very clear, I said, speaking slowly, choosing words like they might explode if handled carelessly. I offered help because something was breaking. I fixed things. That's kind of my whole skill set. A murmur passed through the chamber. The Queen listened, unoffended, curious. I didn't know, I continued, that helping meant what it means here. On my world, it mostly means you're about to be very tired and possibly owe someone coffee. The translator struggled heroically. A few delegates made confused noises. One laughed, a sound like stones tumbling into water. The Queen tilted her head, a gesture I was beginning to understand as amusement. She replied, and this time the translators kept up, perhaps aided by the fact that humor seemed to be a near-universal lubricant. She spoke of intention, of how meanings shift between stars, of how her people valued acts over words. She acknowledged the misunderstanding openly, without embarrassment. The tension in the room loosened, just slightly, like a knot admitting it might someday be untied. But, she added, and the word carried weight even through layers of translation, misunderstanding does not erase feeling. That landed harder than any accusation could have. The court grew quiet again, not with shock, but with attention. She spoke of choice, of how bonds could begin in error, yet grow into truth. She did not claim ownership of me, nor did she release me. She simply stated that what had happened mattered. I found myself smiling, despite everything. On my world, I said carefully, we usually take some time before deciding what something means. The Queen considered this. Then we will take time, she said, together. If anyone had objected, history would have gone differently. But no one did. Perhaps they were too busy recording the moment, or perhaps they sensed what I was only beginning to grasp, that this was no longer about protocol or crisis management. It was about two people from very different worlds acknowledging that something unexpected had occurred, and choosing not to run from it. As the court dispersed, aides swarmed, messages flooded in, and my name trended across star systems I could not pronounce. The Queen leaned toward me slightly. You look overwhelmed, she said quietly now. Just for me. I once got overwhelmed choosing breakfast, I admitted. This is a lot. Her smile was subtle, genuine. Then we will proceed slowly, she said. I am told humans appreciate that. I nodded, thinking that for the first time since arriving on the station, slow sounded like an excellent idea. The first thing I learned after becoming a subject of galactic interest was that privacy was a theoretical concept. The second thing was that no one agreed on what I was now supposed to be. I woke in quarters that were still labeled temporary guest, though the door now recognized my presence with a tone that sounded suspiciously respectful. Outside, the corridor traffic had increased, not in volume, but in hesitation. People slowed down when they passed. Some bowed. One small, many-eyed delegate took a picture and then apologized profusely when I waved back. The Queen had assigned me a liaison team, which I privately called my Please Don't Make Things Worse committee. They briefed me on public reaction while I tried to eat something that looked like fruit but reacted defensively when touched. According to them, half the galaxy believed I was a brilliant strategist executing a subtle political maneuver. The other half believed I was a dangerously charming chaos agent, A few fringe groups had already written songs. None of them rhymed with my name properly. She has not dismissed you, one liaison said carefully, their skin shifting through diplomatic colors. That alone is significant. She hasn't asked me to rule anything, has she? I asked. Not yet, they said. But you are trending. I decided I hated that word. The Queen summoned me later that cycle, not to the court, but to a quieter chamber overlooking the star. Here the light was softer, filtered through fields that reduced cosmic radiation, and I suspected drama. She stood by the transparent barrier, hands clasped behind her back, long ears relaxed. Without the court around her, she seemed lighter. Or perhaps that was my imagination adjusting. You are becoming accustomed to attention, she said, not unkindly. I am pretending very hard, I replied. It's a human technique, she smiled. I have noticed. We spoke of the station, of repairs still needed, of systems that would require long-term solutions. It felt almost normal, like two colleagues discussing work. Almost. There were pauses that stretched just a little too long, moments where our gazes lingered before etiquette nudged us onward. She asked about Earth customs. I asked about hers. When I inquired how many public embraces usually occurred before formal negotiations, she made a thoughtful sound and said, traditionally, one. Good, Matt, I said. I think I've reached my limit. She laughed then, a sound that surprised me with its warmth. You bring levity where there was none, she said. It is refreshing. The galaxy, however, was not feeling refreshed. Messages arrived from rival systems, questioning intent, demanding clarification. Some offered congratulations, thinly veiled as threats. Others suggested amendments to treaties that now apparently involved me. I read summaries with growing disbelief. I fixed a lattice, I said. I didn't conquer anything. Perception often outpaces reality, the Queen replied, and sometimes reshapes it. One delegation requested an audience with me specifically. The liaison team panicked quietly. The Queen considered, then allowed it, on the condition that she remain present. The delegation arrived wearing expressions that suggested they were prepared to be offended. They spoke of balance, of precedent, of the danger of emotional displays influencing governance. I listened, nodded, and then said, on my planet, we usually call this overthinking. Silence followed, then unexpectedly laughter. Not from the delegation, but from the Queen. The tension cracked, just a bit, and the conversation shifted. They left less hostile than they arrived, though still confused. I counted that as a victory. Later, alone again, the Queen grew more serious. You are under no obligation, she said. I will not bind you to a path you did not choose. I considered her words carefully. I don't feel trapped, I said finally. I feel surprised, but not unhappy. Her long ears angled slightly attentive. Then we proceed carefully, she said, step by step. Outside the chamber, the star pulsed steadily, indifferent to politics and misunderstandings. Inside, amid quiet conversation and shared uncertainty, I realized that the crisis had changed shape. The station was stable. The galaxy was not. And somehow, in the middle of it all, I had become something I had never planned to be. Part of a story that was still unfolding, slowly, unpredictably, and with just enough humor to keep fear at bay. Time, I discovered, behaved differently once the galaxy decided you mattered. Days stretched and compressed around obligations I did not remember agreeing to, and my calendar filled itself with meetings labeled things like informal cultural alignment and non-binding presence requested. I attended most of them armed with a smile and the comforting knowledge that no one expected me to understand everything. This was apparently part of my charm. The Queen insisted that I continue my technical work. You are calmer when you fix things, she observed, watching me recalibrate a stubborn environmental node. She was not wrong. Machines made sense. They malfunctioned for reasons. People malfunctioned for reasons too, but they rarely came with manuals, and when they did, they were written by philosophers. We spent more time together, though never without witnesses hovering at respectful distances. We walked the observation rings where artificial gravity softened into gentle curves, the star outside painting slow-moving shadows across the floor. She asked about Earth food, and I described pizza with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. She listened intently, then asked if it was used in diplomatic ceremonies. I told her only on very serious occasions. She showed me the archives of her people, vast memory fields where history was stored not as text but as sensation. Standing there, I felt echoes of decisions made centuries ago, of rulers who had stood where she stood now. "Does it ever get heavy?" I asked. "All the time," she said simply. "That is why I was relieved when you spoke during the crisis. You did not see a queen, you saw a problem." "That's usually how I get into trouble," I said. She smiled, the long ears angling in what I now recognized as amusement. Humor had become our shared refuge, a way to step sideways around the weight pressing in from all directions. When a formal advisor lectured me for 20 minutes on appropriate proximity during state functions, the Queen later leaned toward me and whispered, "You may stand closer next time. It unsettles them." I laughed, and so did she, and the advisor pretended not to notice. Not everyone was amused. Messages grew sharper. A coalition hinted that my presence destabilized existing hierarchies. Another offered me a position elsewhere, framed as an escape. I declined politely, mostly because I did not know how to accept without causing 3 new crises. The Queen watched these developments with calm patience, though I sensed tension beneath it. One evening, as we shared a quiet meal of things that definitely were not pizza, she admitted, "Some believe I am being distracted." "By me?" I asked. "I once forgot my own birthday." "By choice," she corrected. "That frightens them." The idea settled between us, heavy but honest. Choice. For someone whose life had been defined by duty, choosing anything for herself was radical. For me, choosing to stay was becoming less of a question and more of a reality I was slowly accepting. I still woke some mornings expecting to be escorted to a shuttle and thanked for my service. Instead, I found myself discussing long-term repairs, cultural exchanges, and, occasionally, whether hugging should require advance notice. The turning point came quietly. A minor system failure triggered alarms in a residential ring. No danger, just inconvenience. I went to help out of habit. The Queen followed unannounced, leaving protocol trailing behind her. Together, we reassured residents, rerouted power, and listened to complaints delivered in at least 6 languages. At one point, a small child, human as it happened, looked up at her and asked if she was my friend. She paused, looked at me. "Yes," she said, "I am." It should not have mattered. It did. Later, as the alarms faded and normalcy returned, we stood alone by a viewport. The star outside seemed quieter somehow. "You could still leave," she said, not looking at me. "I would understand." I thought about Earth, about anonymity, about a life where offering help did not echo across galaxies. Then I thought about her, about shared laughter and unspoken understanding, about a bond that had begun in error, but was growing into something deliberate. "I don't want to," I said. She turned then, and the relief in her expression was unguarded, almost human. The long ears angled forward, attentive, hopeful. "Then," she said softly, "we continue." Outside, the station hummed along, repaired and resilient. Inside, amid the quiet certainty of chosen paths, I realized that the misunderstanding had become something else entirely. Not a mistake to be corrected, but a beginning, careful, unhurried, and surprisingly kind. Pressure has a sound. I learned that as the station's diplomatic channels began to hum at frequencies too low to hear, but impossible to ignore. It was not the sharp blare of alarms or the polite chime of incoming requests. It was a constant, patient vibration, like the universe tapping its fingers on the table and waiting for an answer. The answer, apparently, involved me. Proposals arrived wrapped in courtesy and threat in equal measure. Some suggested redefining the Queen's bond with me as symbolic, a temporary anomaly to be archived and forgotten. Others suggested formalizing it in ways that made my skin itch, complete with clauses, observers, and schedules that left little room for human error. One particularly creative faction suggested cloning me for continuity, which I declined on the grounds that one of me already forgot where he left his tools. The Queen listened to every message with composed attention. She did not dismiss them outright, nor did she accept them. Instead, she asked questions that made entire delegations reconsider their assumptions. I watched from her side, increasingly aware that standing there was no longer a neutral act. I was part of the equation now, whether I liked it or not. "Do they frighten you?" she asked one evening as we walked the outer ring, where the star's light was filtered into soft bands that brushed against the floor like slow waves. "I've been frightened by less," I admitted. "Once a vending machine on Earth refused to give me my snack. This feels similar, but with more consequences." She made that quiet, amused sound I had come to treasure. "You use humor as armor." "Cheaper than actual armor," I said, "and lighter." The pressure peaked when a formal ultimatum arrived, delivered simultaneously across multiple channels to ensure maximum impact. A coalition of systems demanded clarity. Either the bond would be defined according to established interstellar norms, or they would withdraw cooperation from key trade routes that fed the station. It was not a declaration of war, but it was close enough to smell like one. The Queen dismissed the chamber and stood alone for a long moment, her long ears angled back, her posture still. I did not speak. Some problems required silence first. When she finally turned to me, the mask of authority had slipped just enough to reveal the weight beneath. "They will force a choice," she said, "and that choice will cost something, no matter how it is made." I nodded. "I'm starting to see why people avoid offering help to queens." She smiled faintly, then grew serious again. "You do not owe me sacrifice." "I know," I said, and I did. That knowledge made what came next harder, not easier. Advisors proposed solutions that ranged from the elegantly impractical to the terrifyingly efficient. One involved relocating me off station permanently while maintaining a ceremonial acknowledgement of the bond. Another suggested a public renunciation, carefully worded to preserve dignity while quietly unraveling everything that had happened. Each option carved away a piece of something we had been building, slowly, deliberately. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the maintenance sectors, where the station's true pulse could be felt. Machines whispered to each other in electromagnetic murmurs. Systems adjusted, compensated, endured. I liked it here. Things broke, but they could be fixed, given time and patience. I wondered if people worked the same way. The Queen found me there, of course. She always seemed to know where the station grew quiet. "You hide among machines," she said gently. "They don't ask me to define my existence," I replied. She stood beside me, watching a reactor ring stabilize after a minor fluctuation. "I can release you," she said softly. "Publicly. Cleanly. You may return to your world without consequence." I turned to her. In the low light, she looked less like a symbol and more like what she was, someone who had been alone at the center of everything for far too long. "And you?" I asked. "I will endure," she said. It was not bravado. It was truth. Humor failed me then, slipping through my fingers. "I don't want you to just endure," I said. "I want you to live, whatever that means for you." Her long ears angled forward, attentive, vulnerable. "And what does it mean for you?" That was the question, wasn't it? Not what the galaxy demanded, not what tradition allowed, but what I chose. I thought about the person I had been before arriving, competent, unnoticed, useful in quiet ways. I thought about the person I was becoming, visible, uncertain, standing at the edge of something vast. I thought about how offering help had changed my life, and how running from that change would not restore what I had been. "I stay," I said simply, "not because I have to, because I choose to." The next assembly was unlike any before it. The Queen stood before the coalition and spoke not of bonds or rituals, but of intent. She reframed the misunderstanding as an origin, not a contract. She declared that connection could not be legislated without consent from all involved. She spoke of a future where alliances grew from understanding rather than assumption. Then she invited me to speak. I cleared my throat, acutely aware that history was leaning in. "I fixed a machine," I said. "I offered help because something was breaking. I didn't know what it would mean, but I know this. Choosing to stand together should never be a threat. If it is, then something is already broken." There was silence, then debate, then slowly acceptance. Not unanimous, not perfect, but enough. The coalition withdrew its ultimatum, replacing it with conditions that allowed time, real time, for things to unfold. Afterward, alone again, the Queen looked at me with an expression that held relief, gratitude, and something warmer. "You have altered the trajectory of more than one system," she said. "I once altered a thermostat and caused a building-wide argument," I replied. "This feels similar." She laughed, and the sound eased something tight in my chest. The galaxy had not ended. The station still stood, and the choice we had made, imperfect and human, felt solid enough to build upon. Whatever came next would not be simple, but it would be ours. The station settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than imposed. Its lights dimmed and brightened with purpose now, no longer twitchy with emergency corrections. Trade lanes reopened. Delegations came and went with less suspicion in their eyes. The lattice hummed steadily, content in the way only a well-understood machine could be. I found myself listening to it sometimes, not because I needed to, but because it reminded me of how things sounded before everything became complicated. My role changed quietly. No announcement, no ceremony. I was still fixing things, but now people asked before things broke, which was deeply suspicious. I attended fewer meetings labeled informal and more that involved actual problems with actual solutions. The liaison team relaxed enough to stop hovering, though one still flinched whenever I smiled at a diplomat. The Queen remained unmistakably the Queen, but something in her presence had softened, not weakened, softened, like a blade properly tempered. She ruled with the same clarity, the same resolve. Yet there was space now for humor, for pause. When an advisor began a speech with 3 historical references and no conclusion in sight, she leaned toward me and murmured, "How long before they reach the point?" I whispered back, "They won't, but it's polite to let them try." She covered her smile with regal composure and let the advisor finish. The galaxy adjusted, slowly, begrudgingly, but undeniably. The bond that had started as a misunderstanding found its place not as a threat, not as a spectacle, but as a curiosity that inspired cautious imitation. Some cultures revised their customs. Others pretended they had always allowed room for interpretation. A few still grumbled, but they grumbled from a distance. As for me, I stopped checking departure schedules. Earth became a place I remembered fondly rather than an exit strategy. I sent messages home explaining that I had extended my contract indefinitely. I did not mention the Queen at first. When I finally did, the response was long, confused, supportive, and included a question about whether I was eating properly. I assured them I was, though the truth was that alien cuisine remained a daily adventure. One evening, standing with the Queen by the viewport where this had all begun, she asked, "Do you regret it?" I considered the question seriously. "I regret not knowing how big a hug could be," I said. "But no, I don't regret staying." Her long ears angled forward, attentive, familiar now in their expressiveness. "You are different," she said, "from when you arrived." "So are you," I replied. She nodded. "I am less alone." That mattered more than any treaty. The final loose ends tied themselves with surprising gentleness. The coalition formalized a new framework for cultural misinterpretations, citing our situation with careful neutrality and a footnote that everyone pretended not to laugh at. The station was designated a model for cooperative governance. Someone named a repair drone after me without asking. I let it go. On the anniversary of the crisis, there was no grand celebration, just a quiet gathering of those who had been there when things nearly fell apart. Engineers, aides, guards, diplomats who had learned, as I had, that certainty was overrated. The Queen stood among them, not above them, and spoke of resilience, of choice, of how systems, mechanical or otherwise, survived not by rigidity, but by adaptation. When she finished, she reached for my hand, not ceremonially, just naturally. No cameras surged, no alarm sounded. The moment belonged to us. I realized then how far I had come. I had arrived as someone who fixed problems and left before anyone noticed. I had learned that some offers of help change more than machines. That misunderstanding could become meaning. That choosing to stay, to be seen, to be part of something larger, was not a loss of self, but an expansion of it. The star outside pulsed steadily, indifferent as ever. The station held. The galaxy moved on, altered in small, significant ways. And I stood there, a human who had once offered help without thinking, now fully aware of what it meant, and ready finally to keep offering it, not out of habit, but out of choice. It was enough.